Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. President Trump will not declassify a memo from House Intelligence Committee Democrats, citing national security concerns. The president is asking for revisions of the document. The White House released a letter that said in part, quote, although the president is inclined to declassify the February 5th memorandum, because the memorandum contains numerous properly classified and especially sensitive passages, he is unable to do so at this time. Molly Hooper is a CBSN political contributor and Capitol Hill reporter for The Hill. She joins me now from Washington, and Washington Post congressional reporter and CBS News contributor Ed O'Keefe also joins us on the phone. Molly and Ed, thanks for being with us. Molly, let me start with you. Does this mean we won't be seeing anything from this Democratic memo, or this is just a question of redacting a few things?
Not necessarily. What this means now is that the memo goes back to the House Intelligence Committee. The House Intelligence Committee can vote to send the memo, whether to declassify it or not, to the full House floor. The full House would then debate in closed session whether or not to make this memo public and declassify it, and then they can vote to actually declassify it.
Right.
Keep in mind that the reason that the Republicans blocked basically blocked making the Democratic memo public last week was because they needed to give the House enough time to actually read, to have access to this Democratic memo in a classified setting. So basically it was a procedural delay, but so members of the House have had access to this memo for the past week.
And Ed, do we know anything specific about how this memo drafted by Democrats is different from the Republican version?
For one thing, it does carry out a lot of, it attempts to refute a lot of what had been in the Republican memo. Remember, that one was just 4 pages. This one was closer to 10. And it is believed, although we haven't really seen it, remember, that it does, in fact, claim or include some of the things that the White House there is concerned about, the sensitive information. And that is one of the reasons why there was some concern that this might not be released. But mostly it was put together in an attempt to demonstrate the seriousness of what Democrats understand to be going on with this investigation and how Republicans were trying to twist some of the information. So, again, perhaps encouraging to the Democrats tonight that the president says he's inclined to release it, but that there is some stuff in there that he would rather not see the light of day, given that at least the White House believes it's classified in nature. We'll have to wait and see here in the coming hours what the Democrats on the committee make of that decision and whether they, or, how they think Congress should proceed.
Ed, let me stick with you for a moment here and switch gears. The Washington Post is reporting another White House official has resigned over accusations of abuse. This time it's speechwriter David Sorensen. What can you tell us about this?
So the credit here goes to my colleague Elise Viebeck, who has been among my colleagues who has been looking into accusations of sexual misconduct by various political figures across Washington. And in this case, note the timetable here. She was contacted by Mr. Sorensen's ex-wife about a week ago, long before the Rob Porter accusations came out earlier this week. She alleges that during their marriage he was physically and verbally abusive and was essentially trying to raise those accusations with us. When Elise started to look into this earlier today, they got word at the White House, from the White House, that he had resigned his position. The White House says that when they found out about it Thursday night, he submitted his resignation. Just a few hours ago, the White House did one of its Friday night news dumps and announced a series of staff moves. And in there was a sign that Sorensen was out, and it is what sort of accelerated Elise's reporting here. Sorensen, we should point out, denies these accusations.
Right.
And says that, in fact, during the marriage, he was the victim of abuse, both physical and otherwise, from his ex-wife, and that he is considering a potential defamation suit against her because of the accusations she is now leveling. So he denies these accusations. Another thing to point out here, Tanya, this is someone who did not get that close to the president. He was a speechwriter for the Council on Environmental Quality. That's an office that I don't believe even has a location within the West Wing itself, but probably next door in the old executive office building. Regardless, it is another person working for the executive office of the president accused of sexual misconduct.
Right. According to the Post article, Sorensen sent a text message to the Post saying he stepped down, quote, because he didn't want the White House to have to deal with this distraction. But again, he denies these allegations. Thank you, Ed, for that insight. Molly, let's go back to this memo, because some are saying, that this may be a distraction when really there's some interesting stuff about all of this, the Russia probe and the FBI workings coming out of this Grassley letter. What can you tell us about that?
Well, exactly. I mean, that's kind of the interesting memo that Grassley and Lindsey Graham and their interest in the FISA process and whether it's been abused. I mean, and that's what this whole thing, what people would say who are calling it a distraction, but really, if you look at the FISA process, it's so top secret, classified to the umpth degree, and yet people, American citizens, your civil liberties could be abused because you don't know if the government is surveilling you, and that's part of the reason. I mean, in the one point that this Nunes memo really sought to present, and I'm not sure if they actually were able to hit it out of the park on this one, because again, you didn't have the primary source, was that they're making the contention that the FBI abused that FISA process in obtaining a surveillance warrant on Carter Page, who was then then candidate Trump's one of his advisors, by using a document that was basically paid for with political money from his opposition. And so, there's a very real question to ask about the FISA process, about civil liberty abuse, and that's what at least the Senate Republicans that I've talked to want to know more about.
Isn't it fascinating that in this particular instance, in the debate between civil liberties versus national security, you've got the Republicans fighting for the civil liberty part of it, right?
Well, sometimes it's a bizarro world in this town. And again, I mean, it's not just that. The Republicans just voted to essentially increase the deficit by $500 billion over the next 2 years. It truly is a bizarro world these days. And it really is interesting, though, because I'd have to say that there are quite a few Republicans up on Capitol Hill, one of whom being Rand Paul, who is the uber civil libertarian, who want the government out of your life. I mean, they want no government intrusion, and this is one of those areas where, because we don't know how the government goes about getting these FISA warrants, you can hear that, okay, the FISA process, the warrant process is 100 pages long and it's so involved, and trust us, but how do you trust them? Didn't President Reagan say trust but verify? And it's very difficult to do that. And what the Republicans and Democrats in the Senate really want is to regain some more oversight over this FISA process.
Absolutely.